Welcome to the Brothers in Crime podcast.
We are brothers.
We talk about true crime,
We don't take ourselves too seriously.
and you shouldn't either. All right, Bob, today I thought we'd talk about some other brothers in crime, some pretty notorious brothers. Been saving these two for a while now. It's a little too obvious, so we've done some lesser-known brothers like the Bondurant brothers and others. This isn't a poetry show, sorry. So now I thought we'd talk about the Menendez brothers. You remember them?
I do. And see, I think the problem here is that I don't know that they're brothers in crime because a big part of me thinks they innocent.
Innocent? That's a strong word. We might lose a few listeners there, but I guess before we dive into that, that's interesting. I want to know more. But before we dive into that, I suppose we should give a little bit of background on who they are, what they did, and why we're talking about them. So, what was that famous Weezer song, Beverly Hills? I hear that playing in my mind. I know we can't use it because we'll get sued or whatever, but
Right.
so that's like, just imagine that if you know that song. If not, I don't know what you should imagine, but just think Beverly Hills. So the Menendezes, yeah, I guess that's
Sure,
right.
let's go with that.
The matriarch and patriarch of the family, we've got Kitty was her nickname, and Jose, that's mom and dad, to the Menendez brothers, who are, their names, first names, putting you on the spot?
Erik and Lyle.
Erik and Lyle. Okay, good. All right, I figured you knew a lot about this case, so yeah, it should be a good episode. So anyway, so you've got Jose, Kitty, Erik, and Lyle, and Jose is a very successful executive type dude in different companies throughout his career. I think at the point where the relevant time period we're going to be talking about, wasn't it like a record company, right?
He was in entertainment.
Yeah.
That's really all I knew at the time until more recently.
Right. Well, and so, yeah, I did a little bit of research leading up to this, and interestingly, did you know, before he made it into kind of the entertainment industry properly, do you know one of the companies that he worked for that ties into somebody else that we've talked about on the podcast?
I do not.
So he was a general manager for Hertz.
Oh, okay. Him and OJ working together.
It's funny that you bring that up. So in fact, working for Hertz, he had actually had met OJ, and my understanding is had him over for dinner, and the kids had met him. So that's...
Oh, so you think the kids got some tips from OJ?
Well, just there's some connections here. It's kind of interesting. No, I'm not suggesting that, but just the way that this all weaves together. And you think about it, right? It's LA. All those famous people know everybody. They know each other and whatever. So.
Yeah, but actually, I don't know. Maybe OJ got some tips from them because this happened before OJ, right?
I know about the way the trials went down, but yeah, you're probably right. Thinking about that's a good question. I think you're correct. Because this happened in August of 1989, and OJ was...
It was like 93.
Yeah, so, I don't know, maybe they were hatching plans together, I have no idea. I wasn't there, I can't tell you, but... so that's generally where we are. You know what part of the world we're in now. We're out there, we're in California, and the scene is set, it's 1989. Jose, kind of just a successful... business guy who has worked his way from, Hertz rent-a-car manager in the 70s through some different companies. I think at one point he was some kind of maybe CEO type position at a home entertainment VHS, one of those kind of deals, and then eventually had sort of worked his way into this I would think more prestigious company where, like Bob said, is entertainment type thing. So he's got the boys, Erik and Lyle. By all accounts, he's one of those dads that expects a lot out of them to do well in school, to do well in sports. He pushes them. I think everybody kind of agrees to that he was sort of just constantly pushing them to excel at whatever they did, sort of had this high demand that tennis lessons and soccer, and they're playing all these sports, and they're not just playing them for funsies. He expects them to be it's just as good as they can absolutely be.
Jose is motivated. He's found success. He's very successful. He's living the American dream, and which is something that oftentimes people that aren't as American tend to value more than us plain old Americans do.
Right.
And I don't know, was Jose a first generation immigrant, or had his family been here a long time? I don't. My point is, it's really a compliment that folks that come to this country, or that have only been a generation or two in the country, tend to appreciate the American dream a lot more than some of us that maybe take it for granted.
Yeah, no, that's fair, and it's a good point. And you're right. He actually was born in Cuba, and I think it was around when he was like 16. And this was around the time of the Cuban Revolution. He moved to the United States. He went to college. That's where he met Kitty, who her real name was Mary Louise, but she went by Kitty. They got married in '63, moved to New York City, and he got an accounting degree from Queens College. And then, like you said, hit the ground running, working hard, just trying to live out that quote unquote American dream.
So when he's got kids, then he wants them to not just, rest on their laurels of his success, but he wants them to go do it as well.
Yeah.
Find their own success. That makes sense. There's some other problems with some things he was doing, but go ahead.
Right. So, yeah. So we kind of fast forward to the 80s a little bit. Like I said, there's a lot of pressure on the boys. Erik was attending Beverly Hills High School, and it was clear that he was a talented tennis player. I think maybe it was his junior year. He was ranked 44th in the United States, which you think about how many kids are playing tennis.
I don't know. I think Venus and Serena still could have whooped him.
Oh, well, I don't doubt that for a second.
I mean, they daddy moved them to Compton to harden them up. So
yeah, but it's like comparing somebody to Michael Jordan, right? Like,
yeah, true.
There's always somebody better. Yeah, and then just kind of give a flavor of sort of what's going on in the world with these guys. Lyle had been accepted to and was attending Princeton, very prestigious university. I think now it's like the top-ranked university in the United States. I'm not sure about it this time, but it's always been one of the top universities in the United States. But unfortunately for him, he wasn't doing so hot in his classes. He had been put on probation, academic probation, for bad grades. And then eventually, it's my understanding, he actually was suspended for plagiarizing some of his work.
That's pretty funny, because I was going to ask, all the money he had, he couldn't hire somebody to write his papers. Apparently, he had the same thought. It just didn't. He hired the wrong one.
Yeah, right. Somebody that was doing it for everybody.
Right.
Which is interesting. One of the documentaries I watched, there was a teacher from the private school that they went to when he was younger, and said that both the boys had basically been cheating, and they would cheat in class and stuff. And I guess that was just, I don't know how that side of the world lives.
That's how them damn rich people do.
Right.
What's interesting when we're talking about remember the 2 family annihilator cases we did, where we had Dana Ewell, who killed his mother, father, and sister. He had plagiarized. I think he was the one that plagiarized a paper in a business ethics class.
Yeah, right.
And then I think you had the same thing with Bart Whitaker in his community college he was going to. So maybe there's a theme. College cheaters or mom and daddy killers.
Oh, you might be onto something there.
But all these damn rich people cheat.
I can't argue with that. It definitely seems to be a commonality. Not that every single one does, maybe, but it seems to be more prevalent among that crowd for sure. All right, so let's fast forward a little bit and get to the point that you guys are probably listening for, right? So, like I said, August 20th, 1989. Jose and Kitty, they're in this their schwanky house in Beverly Hills, which my research, this house that they owned and lived in was also at one time lived in by Elton John, Prince, and there was somebody else super famous that had owned this house. It's crazy. So just to give you an idea, this isn't it's a really nice house in the neighborhood you live in, unless you live in Beverly Hills. This is preeminently, I don't know, bougie or whatever.
Right, extra bougie.
Yeah, super bougie. So anyway, August 20th, 1989, Jose and Kitty, they're hanging out at their house. They're in, I think, the room they refer to as their den or whatever. And, it's kind of a normal evening. My understanding was they were enjoying some, I think it was berries and cream or whatever rich people dessert they were having, something like that. And the next thing you know, Lyle and Erik came into the room and they both were carrying shotguns. Jose was shot 6 times with the shotgun, and the fatal shot was to the back of his head. And then Kitty was shot 9 or 10 times. I think 10. I've heard 9 and 10. And the fatal shot for her was essentially like a kind of a side shot to her head, more like the cheek area of her face. And she was shot there on this kind of sideways angle while she was on the ground trying to crawl away and crying while this was going on.
All right, explain to me, when you say 6 times and 9 times, do you mean like 6 projectiles and 9 projectiles, or do you mean like they pulled the trigger 6 times and 9 times? Because depending on what kind of ammo they were using, a shotgun shell, it could have 6 or 9 pellets, projectiles in it.
That's a wonderful question. I'm glad you asked it. Well, what if I told you that Lyle had to run to his car to reload before he fired the shot at his mom's face?
Well, see, that doesn't help me much either. I mean, because how many shells does a 12 gauge usually hold?
I plead the 5th.
Okay, and I don't know. This was a Mossberg 12 gauge. I don't know which one, but I've certainly seen.
Probably like 5 would be my guess.
But I've seen some that hold 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. This one, I would imagine we're talking 3 to 5.
Yeah. And the only reason I ask, not being nitpicky about it, just there's a difference if you shoot a shotgun one time, it shoots out 6 projectiles at that time, and so those 6 projectiles took out Jose, versus did you really run through 3 shells on Jose, reload, run through another 3 shells on Jose, and then do that multiple times on Kitty.
Right. I will say this, based on some of the things that come up in trial, I got the vibe that even if it is projectiles and not actual, trigger pulls, that certainly it was what some might consider to be over the top with a shotgun. Because the reality is, I mean, if you shoot somebody in the head with a shotgun one time, odds are
the job is done.
That's going to be all it takes. But I think so. It's worth kind of noting that in addition to being shot in the head, which is what killed them, my understanding is that they were shot kind of all over. So they were shot in their knees, they were shot in their arms, they were shot in their chest, and then they were shot kind of in the head of the face. So this is a more of like a systematic, like, okay, I'm going to incapacitate you, and then I'm going to kill you, not like I'm just killing you.
I mean, maybe. Is this sick torture stuff, or is this major anger stuff, or is this boys that don't really know what a 12 gauge does, how it works?
Yeah, those are all fair questions. I mean, I have my theories, and we can talk about that. And maybe when we get a little bit more into why they committed this murder, maybe we'll uncover some of that.
Did Jose get shot in the twig and berries?
I've never seen that reported. That's a great question. Have you seen that?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't remember any of those details. I mean, that's been 30 freaking years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair.
Or 35. I don't know. It's been a long day on time.
That has been a long time. I mean, but you could have been there for all I know, because you were hanging out with OJ, even though you won't admit it, out there in the hills.
Yeah, well,
I think what we definitely have here, though, and let's move on a little bit and then kind of circle back to that. So this happens, and initially, the brothers, they call the police, they call 911, and there's this horrific 911 call, right? Oh my gosh, my parents, somebody's killed my parents, somebody shot my parents, they're dead, whatever. And it sounds,
Well, that's entirely truthful. Somebody did shoot their parents.
Absolutely. And the best way to lie is to tell a truthful lie, in case you're wondering.
Yeah, we learned that from Lil Woody.
Oh, my gosh. All right. So, back to, you threw me off there. Now I'm thinking about the YSL trial.
Yeah, I mean, he told the prosecutors, about when he was lying to the police, and we're supposed to believe he's telling the truth now, but whatever. He told them flat out, look, you got to mix a little bit of truth in with this stuff so they buy it.
Right.
Because they're going to check some stuff, so you got to give them some stuff that is going to check out.
Yeah.
All right, so
they call.
Said somebody done killed my mama and daddy.
Yeah, pretty much. Just crying, hysterical, whatever. The police show up, and the police are like, okay. Now I should point out too that, remember, we're in Beverly Hills, okay? So this isn't L.A. proper, right? This is this Gucci neighborhood, and I think they had 2 detectives and averaged maybe a homicide or 2 a year back then. So we're in kind of a jurisdiction where, not to say they're incompetent or anything, but it's just not the norm. It's not something they're dealing with all the time.
They sent Taggart and Rosewood out there.
Right, and so, were you gonna say something else?
No, I was just having pleasant flashbacks about Beverly Hills Cop.
Yeah. And, so they show up, and, of course, the brothers are like, oh, we went to this, we went to the movies. We were going to try to watch this, I forget which movie they said they wanted to go see, but then that one was sold out or packed, and so they went and saw Batman, which they'd already seen before. This is kind of the story that they tell them. And they went and did some other stuff. And so police did not try to get gunshot residue tests from the brothers, which is sort of an interesting decision, but whatever. I don't know. Maybe this is part of that whole you're dealing with like rich people and
right.
You treat them differently. But then the police started to kind of raise some eyebrows in the weeks and months after the murders about the brothers' behavior. And I'm sure you know very well about what was going on there. Basically, they just started like spending money like crazy. I don't know, do you recall any of that stuff, any of the details, or not really?
No, I mean, it's pretty typical, and let's take the other side of the argument here. They didn't do it. They've just had this horrifyingly traumatic experience. They've also had a silver spoon in their mouth their whole lives, but mom and dad have had the brakes on the checkbook, and now it's just handed over to them.
Right.
They've got to decide what to spend and not, so those things could come together, and this could be totally normal that you spend like a fool.
Yeah, and frankly, I mean, I think, if I was in Lyle's shoes, I think I would have bought the exact same things he did. He went out and he bought a place called Chuck's Spring Street Cafe that was a wing joint in Princeton, New Jersey. He got a Rolex and he got a Porsche Carrera. I mean, that sounds like how I grieve. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I could live without the Rolex, but the other things on there, like
a chicken joint.
Yeah, I'd be okay with it.
Take a chicken joint.
Let's take the chicken joint. Let's get the car. I'm down with that.
You don't need to know what time it is.
So no, I don't even need to be at Princeton anymore. But how old are these? How old were they at the time of the murders?
I think 18 and 21.
Yeah, they were.
So they're young.
You're right, young and remember, these are rich, privileged 18 and 21, which means
right.
They might be.
This ain't Khalid's young, dumb, and broke. This is just young, dumb, and rich.
Right. Yeah. So they don't know. They just don't know.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. And so then, in addition to Lyle's spending, Erik was spending too. He hired a full-time tennis coach and went and was competing in a bunch of tennis tournaments and whatever. They eventually went from the Beverly Hills mansion they were living in with their parents, where their parents were murdered, to they got some adjoining condos in Marina Del Rey. Have you spent any time out there in that area?
A long time ago.
Well, I'll tell you. So I went there last year, I guess, and just the first time I've been on the West Coast, I'm driving around or whatever, and I mean, I can't impress upon you enough that you kind of go to like Venice Beach, and it's sort of interesting, and there's lots of like homeless encampments, and just I don't want to say dirty, but like it's got that kind of a vibe. Like it's like tent city in the middle of everywhere where there can be one, and you don't really want to use the bathrooms there, and it's just kind of it's interesting. And then as you're driving through that, you get to the Marina Del Rey, and it's literally like you drive and there's this sign that's like Marina Del Rey, and all of a sudden you go from that to like, you see everybody's yachts, and everything is like just super bougie, and all of a sudden there's no homeless people, and there's no trash, and everything, we stopped at a Starbucks there. You can make jokes about that. And it's like even the Starbucks is like extra bougie for Starbucks, which is...
It ought to be for $11 for a cup of damn coffee.
Right.
And I should clarify, when my time in Southern California, I wasn't in any of these fancy damn places. My ass was sitting on Pacific Coast Highway in amongst 8 million other cars in my rental thinking, where in the hell am I? I spent some time in LAX. I was shocked. I think that was probably mid-90s, early 90s. And, there I am stuck in LAX overnight, and I'm trying to sleep on the floor in the news over this vacant bar that I'm next to. And the airport is comes on with the a lot of news channels, they'll do like weather on the 8s or whatever. So at 08 and 18 and whatever, they give you the weather. This one was doing the drive-by update and reporting the drive-bys. And I'm like, wow, you got enough of them that you can do them.
It's a segment of the news.
Right. That was pretty wild there. I ended up in the place where what were them people? The Heaven's Gate cult.
Oh yeah.
All killed themselves to jump on Halley's Comet or some shit.
Hale-Bopp? Was it Hale-Bopp?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Well, I'm glad you didn't join them. That's good.
Yeah, no, they were already dead and gone by the time. So yeah, my version of Southern California and yours is a little bit different.
That's fair. I just tried to take as much in as I could, so I didn't only stay in the hoity-toity places, but I want to drive through and check them out. But anyway, back to these Menendez brothers. So to your point where you're like, well, is this really outrageous? A lot of the family members kind of defended their spending and said, look, this is no different than, this is kind of par for the course for them. Like maybe it upticked a little bit, but
sure,
this isn't that crazy. It's not like you or me going out and spending. I think it was the reports were that they had spent somewhere around $700,000 between their parents' deaths and when they were arrested, which didn't take a whole lot longer.
I'm just thinking like that. This kid's really good at tennis. I don't know that it would be unusual that if their parents were alive that they wouldn't have hired him a full-time coach.
Right, and he had other tennis coaches throughout the years, and so it's not. This isn't like okay, mom, dad are dead, and they never let us spend $2, and we lived kind of poor, and now all of a sudden we're spending millions a day. It could be in line with, but it definitely raised some eyebrows of the investigators. At one point, now this is worth noting, some people in our listening audience may appreciate this. They had attended a New York Knicks basketball game. Do you know about this?
No.
So they attended this Knicks game, and they were sitting courtside, and we probably wouldn't even, I don't know that we'd even really know that, or it would be noteworthy, except that like baseball cards and basketball cards, that kind of stuff.
Right.
So there's this player, Mark Jackson, when they made his card that this year that this happened, Erik and Lyle are actually sitting courtside, and they're in the background of the card.
That's pretty wild.
And so then after all this kind of went down, it became taboo. I think maybe they tried to pull it and whatever. I do have a copy of it. Remind me, I'll show you afterward. It's pretty neat for what it is. I'm not, whatever. Anyway, so back to the police. So they start to suspect that maybe Erik and Lyle are the people who did this, and they're looking at different things. There's not really any signs of a motive. I think there was no real sign of a break-in. The one thing that was noteworthy from the scene was that the shotgun shells had been collected, and that just led them to think, well, for whatever reason, whoever did this doesn't want us to be able to print the shells or use them or whatever. Which to me, I just think that's like, if you're going to be that kind of person, if you're going to kill people, I mean, you're just doing your due diligence. I don't really know.
Right. This should be like day one of killer training.
Right. Like if you're leaving the shotgun shells, I think you're just really, really stupid.
Right.
Honestly.
Right. But I guess it sort of give you an idea of the person or persons that were committing this crime, that it probably wasn't a surprise thing.
Yeah. It just happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So there was some thought that went into it. That's a good point. That's fair. I think at one point there was some conversation about whether this was a mob hit, and I think some people kind of believed that maybe it was. And frankly, if you can Google and look at, some of the blurred out crime scene photos or the actual crime scene photos or whatever, it was I can understand, shotgun to the face for both of these victims. I can understand why maybe some people thought potentially this was mob related. I don't know what you think, but
yeah. I mean, you have to connect the dots for me on that of what was their association with the mob. I'm not saying it's not possible, but the mob just doesn't go randomly hit uninvolved people.
Yeah, I'm not saying, yeah, and frankly, I mean, it's a red herring, so it's not worth getting into, but this was one of the leads that the police at least were, I think just based on what they saw, okay, the shells are collected, there's like shotguns to the face, this prominent family, is there a connection there? And I think ultimately they were like, yeah, there's no connection here. And then given the spending and just some other things that kind of raised eyebrows, they decided to focus in on the Menendez brothers, and ultimately, a lot of people don't know this, and I don't know if you know this or not, but the first time that the district attorney presented this case to the grand jury, they actually voted not to return a true bill and did not indict the brothers.
Well, that's shocking as hell.
Right? I mean, to me, like, that whole expression, you can indict a ham sandwich, that's true. It doesn't take much. Like, it's very simple, really. I mean, if you try hard, you should be able to indict just about anybody for just about anything.
See, I think if you go before a grand jury and they don't indict, that should be the end of it. Like, you don't get another shot at that, because if you couldn't convince them, then, like, seriously.
Right.
And I don't want to say convince them, because it's not like grand juries are dumb or anything. It's not that. It's just the burden of proof that's required to get an indictment.
Well, and the way it's designed, it's not designed to be difficult, which is that's the whole point. But the prosecutor, there's nobody to counterbalance the prosecutor. They're there in front of the grand jury, and they get to present whatever they want, however they want.
Right. This is why.
Truthfully, I mean, they have to be honest.
Right, but this is why we believe this happened, and the grand jury's job is to say, okay, that's plausible, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my assumption there is that is just to prevent absolutely heinous, completely unfounded prosecutions.
Yeah, right.
Even though a bunch of those still happen. But
yeah, it's a safeguard so that you don't have, Bob the prosecutor going out and going, you know what? Will pissed me off the other day. I'm going to just indict him.
Right.
And you don't have to do anything other than stamp your signature on there to do it. Although, yeah. Anyway.
But at the same time, I mean, it's like a padlock on a paper bag, though.
Kind of. I mean, it could be. It could be.
So, enough about that.
Right. So we fast forward to March of 1990. That's when Lyle's arrested, and Erik turned himself in 3 days later after returning to Los Angeles from Israel, where he was doing some tennis, is my understanding.
Should have stayed his ass over there.
Right? That's, So both were held without bail, and they were jailed separately. There were some interesting pretrial things that came up with, they both were talking to, what's his name? They had a therapist, essentially, they were talking to. And so the state wanted to get in some tapes, which this is kind of an interesting thing. I don't want to go down this too much, but basically there were some things that they had talked about. They had also discussed the murders with this therapist, and ultimately the judge let most of the tapes come in except for the ones where they actually discussed, like, the murders, what happened in the murders themselves.
Gotcha.
So then it was after that decision that the grand jury issued indictments in December of 92, charging the brothers with the murders of Jose and Kitty. So again, the murders happened in, what did I say?
89.
August of 89, right? No, I said? Yeah. Yeah. So August 20th, 1989, we got the murders. And then this pretrial ruling on the admissibility of these tapes doesn't happen until August of 1990, so a year later. And then they're not actually indicted until December of 92.
So they were arrested, and then for 2 years before they were...
Yeah, and so part of that was the judge's pretrial ruling on the tapes was appealed all the way up to the California Supreme Court pretrial.
Uh-huh.
Because it's a pretrial ruling,
right.
Typically you'd have to wait, the whole thing would conclude, and then you would appeal stuff. But this, because it would affect the trial so much, it went up on appeal and got decided before the trial actually took place.
Gotcha.
So that's where the delay came in. So then you had the trials, right? Which, I mean, this was sort of in that infancy of, like, court TV, national television. Everybody kind of stopped what they were doing and watching stuff. The first trial, I'm just tipping my hat a little bit, I think it started in 93 is my understanding, and they had Leslie Abramson as their attorney. You remember her?
I do, and I remember both the boys pretty much every day were dressed in a nice sweater and a collared shirt poking out from it, looking like just the boys next door.
Right, like nice, not like super Gucci rich, but like, presentable.
Oh yeah, nothing that appeared fancy. It looked like these could be anybody's kids or brothers.
Right. So you had this first trial that starts. You got this court broadcast. People are interested, all this stuff. In the first trial, essentially the defense's theory was this idea of like, they call it like imperfect self-defense, right? So self-defense would be you're attacking me, you're trying to kill me, and I kill you in self-defense. So that's like, they don't say perfect, but that's self-defense. That's what we typically think of. Imperfect self-defense is like if you imagine somebody who's being abused, like a woman who's being abused by her husband over and over and over and over and over again, and finally one day, that's it. She's had it, and she shoots him in his sleep.
Yeah, the battered wife defense.
Right, but in there, that would be an example of like an imperfect self-defense where it's self-defense-esque, but
right. It's not that he's charging at her with a knife right this second, but that she's endured it for so long that it's inevitable. It's an ongoing abuse.
Right, exactly. And so that was sort of the defense's theory. And so you might say, well, like, okay, you said that Dad was this rich executive who worked hard and pushed his boys. Like, what? I don't understand what's going on here. Well, the first trial, what came out was that the brothers alleged and put on quite a bit of evidence to support it, that they had endured a lifetime of abuse at the hands of their parents, particularly being sexually abused by Jose, their father. And they kind of, it basically, he gets portrayed as this like cruel, evil, perfectionist pedophile. I think that's a really fair way to describe it.
It paints an ugly picture.
Yeah, and I mean, they had witness after witness after witness, the defense did, who came and testified about all these things that frankly are just like disturbing and gross and disgusting and evil and awful about, just things that people noticed, but then nobody did anything. And it seemed like it was part of this whole, Jose was sort of this very, driven, powerful guy. And so people just sort of saw things and just kind of ignored it in one way or another, however they had to do that mentally.
What? Like why, 20, 30 years later, we're hearing all this stuff come out about Diddy?
Right. Well, and you look at a lot of these kind of cases. Larry Nassar, the doctor, like he was abusing his patients while their parents were in the room sometimes.
Right.
I mean, so there's a lot of these instances where people who are in these positions of trust or power or whatever are able to get away with things that are just mind-blowing. And so here, basically, the brothers described, starting at a young age, how after sports practices, their dad would make them, touch him, and then he'd touch them, and then ultimately, it turns into just full-blown.
I don't want to know anymore.
The worst stuff, right? And I'm not going to get into the details, but the worst stuff you can imagine. And it continued, and my understanding was that testimony at trial was that with the younger brother, which I always get them mixed up.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, all right. I was hoping you would be able to keep it straight. But between Erik and Lyle, the younger one, that this was continuing on, and even a couple weeks before the murders was like the last time that that his dad had assaulted him. And so all this, testimony comes out at trial. And in that, it's not that they're saying we didn't kill him or killed him. It's we killed him, and this is why we killed him.
Right.
And so it goes to the jury in this first case, and ultimately the jury's deadlocked. And they deadlocked my when I researched it, I think it was 6-6. 6 wanted to convict them of murder, and 6 wanted to convict them of manslaughter, basically accepting. So half the jury accepted the defense, and half the jury didn't accept the defense, more or less. And so, the jury deadlocks, but the DA decides, undeterred, that they're going to retry them. And then in the retrial, things are very, very different. For example, in the second trial, which has the same judge presiding over it, He decided that he wouldn't allow cameras in the courtroom for the second trial, even though he had allowed them in the first.
Right.
He also, there had been a Supreme Court decision that had limited testimony about sex abuse claims that had occurred kind of between the first trial and the second trial. And interpreting that decision, which wasn't directly related to this case, but the judge felt had some bearing on what was going on, it influenced some of his rulings on what he would allow the defense to do. And there's a new prosecutor that comes into the case, and he decides that they're going to, instead of sort of acquiescing to some of this defense and this imperfect self-defense that was allowed, he's just going to go as hard as he can against letting any of that happen. And so he pushes really, really hard for, and I forget how they characterized it, but he basically downplays this as like a just this clear ploy to basically beat the conviction.
Yeah, smear the victims.
Right.
With false claims. Yeah, I see the approach, and sounds, I mean, I'm looking back 30 years here, but in the big picture, judge now decides, well, we're going to not have the cameras, so we're going to keep the world from watching, and I'm going to cut out as much of this evidence as I can.
Yeah, so let me pause you right there. So, exactly. So he cuts out a bunch of this evidence. So he says, like, a bunch of the defense witnesses who were allowed to testify the first time can't testify in the second trial. So the defense is allowed to raise some evidence of this abuse that goes to their defense, but very, very little. And really none of, like, the sex abuse stuff came in. And then I think what makes this just kind of mind-boggling to me is, my understanding is that in the closing argument, the prosecutor got up there and said, ladies and gentlemen, you haven't heard any evidence of sexual abuse in this case.
Damn.
Which, to me, that, like, right there, that should not have been allowed. It's one thing to say, we're not going to let this in. It's another thing to say, the defendant didn't give you X. One, I don't think that's proper to begin with. I don't think you should be able to comment on the defendant's evidence because they don't have any obligation to present any evidence at all.
Yeah, when they have a self-defense defense, they have an affirmative defense. Now they've got to prove. And how are you supposed to prove it if the evidence isn't allowed in?
Well, and this is where it gets even crazier. So the judge didn't even let the jury vote on manslaughter. He didn't let that defense, he didn't let that go to the jury. So basically they were left with, is it murder or nothing? And in a case where they've said, yeah, we killed him, and we killed him because, whatever, I don't know how you expect anything else to happen.
Right. I mean, if I'm on the jury, it'd be different.
Now, do you
Because
know?
I'm going to sit there and say, they gave us one option, murder. This is not murder.
Right.
The end.
Right. Do you know what happened between the first trial and the second trial as well? There was something, remember, we're in LA County, is my understanding. And there was another trial that had taken place between the Menendez brothers' first trial and second trial.
When was the second trial?
I was trying to find the date because I knew you were going to ask me. Oh, man.
Well, when was the first trial?
Well, the first trial started in 93.
Oh, well, then I'm guessing OJ.
Bingo.
Yeah.
So right before this second trial happened in the Menendez brothers, the LA DA's office had lost the OJ trial. And that had been, and we covered it in the OJ episode that we did, that had sort of been another just blemish or a black eye on the DA's office in that county, where they had this string of losing high-profile cases. And so now it was like, that's it. All bets are off. We're going to win this.
I mean, they had some other problems too, because it was, right, so this murder happened in 89, wasn't it? Somewhere around there that Rodney King went down, and then the LA was a freaking hot mess. Not that it isn't today, but anyway, yeah, no, I got you. So they want blood. They are going to convict.
Right. So they're out to get it at all costs. Basically, that's where they are.
Yeah, we're prosecutors are after the truth, not convictions. My ass.
So they get their conviction on murder, and then it moves into the penalty phase, where things get a little weird and whatever. And I don't really want to get into that too much because it doesn't matter. Essentially, what you need to know is that ultimately the brothers were sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, and that those were sentences to be conserved consecutive for the killings and the conspiracy to commit murder charges. So they were convicted of first degree murder, and then also
Conspiracy. So they got back-to-back LWOPs each.
Exactly.
All right, but here's the thing,
and 18 and 21.
I hope you're going to fast forward here to more of the present day, because we've recently learned that there are accusations from one of the Menudo fellas
Bingo.
that Jose was diddling them too.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a special, like a documentary or whatever, I think it's on Peacock, that covers that. It's like Menendez and help me?
Menudo?
Thank you. And essentially there's a, what's it called? Like a journalist who has kind of been covering this Menendez thing for forever. And he talks about it in there, how he bumped into Jose at this trade show thing in Vegas related to his work and whatever. And then the case sort of evolved into what it was, and he just became interested in it. And so he started kind of covering it from the beginning. And then as time has went on, he's stuck with it. And he's sort of the guy who's at the helm of this, uncovering this stuff that happened with the Menudo band, I guess you would say.
I would call it a group, a singing group. I don't necessarily remember any instruments, but these were all...
You're a big fan. You had their posters on your wall, didn't you?
I didn't have posters, but I mean, I definitely liked their music, and they were insanely popular in pop music in the mid, late 80s, early 90s, whatever. It was all, Hispanic, Latin young men,
including Ricky Martin.
Right. I mean, and they were a big, I don't know how to say it, but like, I'm sure if you had any Hispanic heritage, this was a pretty big deal to have this group. It's like New Kids on the Block or NSYNC or whatever, or the Beatles or the Monkees, only they're all Latin. Mm-hmm. And they were good.
Right. Yeah, and so there's some allegations there, and there's been a lot of talk about how, Jose had some involvement with the guy who kind of came up with this Menudo concept. Apparently, and unsurprisingly to me, when you learn more about the way the group was formed and then some of the requirements and how that all worked, it doesn't take you long to figure out that there's probably something not good going on. Like, my understanding is, the boys, I think there were roughly 50 different boys who participated in the group throughout the years, and there was a cap. It was like once they turned 16 or 17, they aged out. I think they started as young as like 12. And then once you hit a certain age, you had to move on. Well, that's a big red flag for me.
Yeah, that's kind of creepy. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess you do that on kids shows to a degree, but a hard cap of that's kind of weird. It seems like as long as you've got a mix of what do you call them, characters,
right,
that will appeal to a broad audience, then you should be fine without a number of, nope, you aged out, because that's what pedophiles do.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I'm just cynical. So like when I hear that, and I'm not saying that's always bad, right? But in my mind, I'm just thinking, yeah, that sounds bad.
I mean, there's times where that's also having an age out is appropriate. Like, rec leagues and whatnot for certain sports, they'll go based on age or school grade. And that makes sense. You don't want 18-year-olds playing basketball against 11-year-olds.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. So tying that all in, right? So recently, in the last couple years, the Menendez brothers, they filed what's called like a petition for writ of habeas corpus, which essentially is a legal mechanism to try to have your conviction reviewed and hopefully overturned and a chance for a new trial. That's really what they're seeking. And in order, at this point in the game where it's so many years, decades down the road, the only way that they're really going to have a shot at that, any shot, and it's a long shot at that, is to present some sort of new evidence. And so this whole Menudo thing has created or generated what I would say is some of the looking into some things that has found some potentially new evidence for them, and that's what they've included in their petition, which is still pending. And I think I'm trying to go through part of the new evidence is I think there was a letter, is my understanding, So it was written by Erik to Erik's cousin in '88. So almost a year before the crimes. And so it details some of the stuff about, well, what he was going through, right? Trying to avoid his dad. It's still happening. It's worse for me now. I stay up at night, every night, thinking that he's going to come in. I'm afraid he's crazy. And he warned me 100 times about telling anyone, especially Lyle. So Lyle must be the older one. Now, what's interesting to me is if this is a letter written by Erik, it's part of me says, well, how's that new evidence? Because, your client wrote it, so it exists. But maybe he wrote it, sent it to him, and assumed it was destroyed or they didn't have access to it or whatever.
Right. Who knows? Maybe the cousin tried to testify to it but didn't have the actual letter, and then it was either found, or the prosecutor will argue, how do we know it hasn't been written since then? Of course, you carbon date that thing or something.
Yeah, right. And I think that's just one piece of this, right? Because at this point they've put together a bunch of different evidence, and I'm sure part of their argument is the different things that we understand now that we didn't understand 30 years ago about the effects that kind of abuse has on those kind of victims. And I think back then, my understanding is in the first trial, it was prosecuted by a lady, and I can't remember her name. I think it was Pam something. I read that one of the comments she made, and I don't know if this was during the trial, I think it was, but one of the comments she made was essentially that men can't be raped because they don't have the right parts.
That is absolutely false.
And I share that because, yeah, it's clearly false, you're right. But just to kind of put the thing in context, right? Like, you go back that far ago, and there were some viewpoints and opinions and thoughts that were sort of considered true, that now we would very easily say, yeah, no, that's not right. That's incorrect.
Right. It's not how that works.
So, yeah, it's
So you've got that letter that's new. I mean, but you've got the evidence that the judge wouldn't allow in the second trial. I'm sure they appealed all that, and by now I'm guessing 30-some years later have lost those appeals. But you got that evidence that wasn't allowed in the testimony. You've got this letter that it's not excellent evidence unless you can prove it really existed in 1988 before the murders. But then you also have the other Menudo kid swearing, wasn't it a affidavit that he was raped and sexually assaulted, and provided details of it in the mid-'80s by Jose.
Yeah, so that's Roy Rosello, who was a member of the boy band group, whatever you want to call it. And you're exactly right. So he said it was in the early '80s. He was a minor. He was part of the band. And Jose was working as an executive at RCA Records at the time. And then that's when RCA had signed Menudo to a recording contract. And in this sworn affidavit that was filed as part of this in 2023, he says that he went to Jose's house sometime in the fall of '83 or '84. He was either 14 or 15 at the time, and he says that he drank, quote, a glass of wine, and then basically felt like he was paralyzed, had no control, couldn't do anything, and then says that that's when Jose took him to a room and raped him.
All right, so you check out this cat's story, and I mean, unless there's some evidence that this is made up, I think this should be over.
Yeah, and so let's circle back, because I think at the beginning of this, and I told you to just put a pin in it, we'd come back to it. You said they're innocent, and so I'm curious I think now's a good time for you to kind of unpack what you mean by that and your thoughts.
Well, so what was the evidence of the first trial, that the testimony that seemed like everybody knew there was some strange stuff happening, and these boys were just supposed to tolerate it and live with it, and if you're a survivor of that kind of stuff, of course they're still living through it. Mm-hmm. I don't know that you're necessarily thinking as clearly as you might be when you're sitting in court completely removed from it and it's not happening to you.
Yeah.
So you getting diddled by daddy and you blast him with a 12 gauge, I'm fine with that.
That's okay.
Totally fine with that.
Oh my gosh.
And then but we kind of hold out any evidence about that, and then you have again, the letters just, and I'm kind of on their side. I kind of feel like the brothers had a raw deal all the way around here and should be out. But this letter isn't the greatest evidence in the world, because remember that nut job in Wisconsin that was producing all these letters after the fact?
Yes.
That clearly that was just preposterous.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it is possible. Now, if there's some way they can, look at this letter and go, I'll be damned, he did write this in 1988. That would be huge as as far, but unless you can't, I guess it's just questionable. But then you got this other cat come forward, the Rosella guy, like, he comes out and says, yeah, I'd be going, and I would hope the police would, whether you think Lyle and Erik are guilty or not, you need to go find every person that was ever a member of Menudo and ask them. Anything happen? You don't put it on them,
right.
But be like, look, are you, anything we need to, because if it's, and what we're learning these days,
it ain't one person usually,
right,
with something like this.
Was Jose the only one that was a problem, or are there still people living that are still a problem?
Right.
Cut that shit out.
Yeah.
So plus, what are these guys have been in 30-some years already?
Yeah.
Like, shoot.
Yeah, and that's so. Just to kind of. I think what their attorney has said, I'm trying to find a quote here. So he said, the boys were abused as children. They were abused their whole life. And this is a manslaughter case, not a murder case. It's just that simple. That's how I see this personally. I see it that way too. I think that what's interesting to me, though, is just from a legal standpoint, the rulings the judge made in the second trial, and those have all been, appealed and upheld to this point and all that stuff. So the fact that you didn't let that evidence come in, it makes me wonder in these habeas petitions, okay, so this is more evidence that the judge just probably wouldn't have allowed in the trial.
Right.
So...
Right, and the prosecution doing their job would have argued, as far as the letter, well, we don't know when that was written, and they would have made no effort to find out. Now, the other dude, they probably would have argued that, well...
That has nothing to do with whether Erik and Lyle... Because that was their whole argument.
Right.
Okay, so if Jose raped this boy in 1983, that has no relevancy whatsoever to whether they murdered Jose in 1989.
Right, and if I'm the defense attorney, I'm going, are you effing kidding me?
Right. Well, and I'm sure that, what's her name, Abramson, have you seen that clip where, the media's like following her in the courtroom? Well, they're walking backwards, and then she's, just flipping them off the whole way and says, here, is this what you want? Go ahead, take it.
I think the impression I got from back in the day when this was going down was that she was very invested.
Yeah.
These weren't just clients. She felt like, and it came across like Mama Bear trying to help these kids.
Yeah, well, she's from what I could tell, solid, good at her work, and put a lot of, a case like this, I can't even imagine how many hours she would have spent working on this case. It would be your life for years.
And she had some good looking hair too.
Yeah.
That hair, she wasn't hard to look at.
So, but I guess, we're kind of waiting on a ruling. But I just, it's interesting to me. I'll be interested to see how the court analyzes it from the perspective of, okay, there is new evidence. This is all very interesting things. But if we go back to that trial and we look at that, how does this change that? And
how about this? This is the same damn state. We had that one case where the dude got let out because he was good at writing poetry.
Right.
Seriously? The only way you don't get, early parole in California is if you're Manson, who actually never actually killed anyone.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting thing, too, where some people, it's depending on their sentence and whatever, it's kind of crazy. I will say there have been some definite changes in the law nationally in terms of, and we talked about that with the DC sniper case. Life without parole for minors is unconstitutional. Well, 18 and 21 is pretty close as you can get to minors. So there's been some shifts in that regard, too, in addition to just what our understanding of the abuse that they suffered and the impact that would have had on them. that maybe they didn't appreciate back in the 1990s.
All right, so free Lyle and Erik and reboot Menudo.
Okay, that's fair. And just so you know, why are we covering this one today? Well, today, so we haven't seen it yet because we record ahead of time in case you're not catching that. Netflix is dropping Monsters, the Lyle and Erik Menendez story. I don't know whether to expect it to be awful, terrible, great, whatever, because we haven't seen it yet. But we'll probably do a follow-up at some point where we'll talk about sort of what our thoughts were on how the series did. I'm not sure what to expect, but it's out today. They didn't sponsor us. We're not getting anything. Netflix, if you want to send us some money, hit us up. We'll tell you how to do that. But I don't think that's going to happen. So
Yeah, but I mean, before you consider that, Netflix, most of your documentaries are extremely one-sided and biased, and you're interested in storytelling, not in facts.
And to be clear, I don't think this is a documentary, right? This is like one of those, what do they call it, where they recreate the...
Well, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Based on a true story type of thing.
Yeah, but it's dramatized. And
yeah,
it's like
right.
Yeah, because, I mean, if you saw that, I got a little clip of it rolling here.
You had two naked guys hugging.
That's supposed to be Erik and Lyle, and that's the promo trailer for this Monsters, the Lyle and Erik Menendez story.
Oh, okay.
So that's what I mean. Like, this could be absolute garbage. I don't know. We'll see. But knowing that this was coming out and people are going to be talking about the Menendez brothers, we kind of wanted to get in front of that a little bit and then revisit it once we have a chance to see what this is. But some other brothers in crime, whether they should have been or not, Bob says, free them, they're innocent. I think, I wouldn't go so far to say they're innocent, but I think...
Of murder, they're innocent.
I think what they're attorneys...
If you want to talk about homicide or manslaughter or, I don't know, you could even go for an affirmative defense here other than self-defense. You go with a, insanity or something. Because how are you of normal mind if your dad is doing this to you on a regular basis? That's maybe an angle I'd probably lose because, I ain't exactly Johnny Cochran or Jerry Spence, but I'd give it a shot.
That's fair. I'm glad you unpacked that a little more. That makes sense to me. But I'm with you. I agree with what their current habeas attorney has said in the sense that, which is basically what you just said, that this is a manslaughter case. This is not, it's not a first-degree homicide case. It just isn't.
Right.
First-degree murder. So that's it. Erik and Lyle Menendez. So we'll revisit this after we've had a chance to check out Netflix's whatever they call it, and let us know what you think. If you watch it, hit us up on social, send us a comment, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with us on the Brothers in Crime podcast. Feedback and suggestions are always welcome. For links and resources related to this episode, please see the show notes or visit us at brothersincrimepodcast.com. We hope you'll save, subscribe, or bookmark us on your favorite podcast site, and join us for the next episode.